So good morning, prof and my fellow classmates. I have with me my teammates, Isabel, Lisi, and Zami, and I am Tisha. And today we'll be going through the three fallacies. First, we will start off with appeal to believe, and second, the ad hominem fallacy, and lastly, we will go through the accident fallacy. And we will end off with the conclusion, with key takeaways, and lastly, we will have our quiz to test your understanding. So the first fallacy, which is appeal to belief. So this fallacy is a common fallacy which occurs when a person makes an argument with an unfortunate circumstances or sharing a sad story to get the listeners to accept a conclusion out of pity. So it is important to note that appeal to pity is not always fallacious because it depends on the situation. So the fallacy is only fallacious. The appeal to pity is only fallacious when there is failure of relevance, which means the premises are not logically relevant to the conclusion. And second, when there is intentions to exploit emotions. So this is a general structure of an appeal to pity argument. So X is in distress, and if Y brings about A, it will relieve the distress, and therefore Y ought to bring about A. So I'll be moving on to some of the teaching examples to get you more familiarized with this. So this is a conversation between a professor and a student. So the student is trying to appeal to the professor that he deserves an A grade just because he doesn't have time to study and he's working 15 hours a week. And if the student gets a B, it will seriously hurt his chances to get into medical school. So in this example, it is clear that the premises are not logically relevant to the conclusion because the student's personal situation and career goals are clearly irrelevant to the conclusion of how the professor should provide him with an A. So therefore, this argument is fallacious. So the next example is about a sad story of a suitor who suffered deeply in the pursuit of his beloved. So he apparently, after chasing the girl, he has been not being able to study, and he uses this as an excuse to make the girl go on a date with him. So again, the premises provided are logically irrelevant to the conclusion because given the suitor's unfortunate circumstances, it does not make it necessary for the girl to go on a date with him. So what if this person is a known stalker? And not to mention that it is only right for the girl to go on a date with someone she likes and not who she is. And therefore, this argument is fallacious. In the next example, I'll be talking about a dialogue between a judge and a tax evader. So the tax evader uses his unfortunate circumstances again to appeal to the judge that he should be fined instead of being in prison. So he uses things like how his reputation will be ruined and how he will lose his job and his kids will starve. So again, this example is fallacious because the judge is supposed to charge him with the punishment he deserves based on the crimes he committed and not based on his situation. So the premises does not justify why the judge should charge him a lighter sentence, so this is fallacious. So this example is similar to the previous example, just that now there is two options the judge can make for the same crime that the tax evader committed. So he can either fine or send him to prison. So what difference does it make? So in this case, the judge has an option to choose between fining and imprisonment. So the premises are logically relevant to the conclusion because the judge has the choice to to charge the tax evader a lighter sentence due to his unfortunate circumstances. So therefore, this is not malicious. Now I'll be moving on to some of the real life examples. And the first case will be about this girl called Naira. So this happened during the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq. So it happened in the 1990s. And I'll be going through this is the whole sequence of the events, but I'll be focusing mainly on the testimony by Naira. So let me provide you some background information. So before this testimony, there has already been considerations by the US to restore the Kuwait's governor, restore their powers. So, but there hasn't been any complete plans discussed yet. So, on 10th of October 1990, there is a girl called Naira. She is 15 years old and she testified on crime, saying that the Kuwaiti soldiers were being cruel as they put the babies out from incubators and killing innocent infants. So this testimony has generated a lot of pity from the public, and it is reported that after this testimony, George Bush actually repeated this story at least 10 times the following week. So fast forward to 10th of January 1991, the US Senate voted to authorize going to war against Iraq. And 7 of the senators actually cited this testimony to back the use of their force. And on March 1991, finally the Naira's identity was revealed. She was actually a daughter of a member in the Kuwait's royal family. So in this case, even if the story of the Iraqi soldiers leaving the babies to die was true, it is not sufficient for the United States to mobilize their force. The premise is not logically relevant to the conclusion because the US cannot be declaring war just because Kuwait is in a critical situation, and the reasoning is clearly not sufficient. So, for example, they should be intervening only when there is a threat of humanitarian disaster, such as use of nuclear or other bigger ones. So the next case will be about a drug trafficker, which I'm sure most of you have heard of this case. So this Malaysian, he tried to smuggle a small amount of heroin to Singapore, and he was arrested in 2009, and he was charged with death penalty. The lawyer argued that he has an IQ of 69 and he should be protected under international law because of his lack of mental capability. And he admitted that he was coerced into carrying drugs. So due to the fact that he has a low IQ, the public believe that he should be spared from the death penalty. Despite all the outcry and controversies, the capital punishment is still being carried out. So, in this case, although this might seem like a reasonable argument, the information provided might be used as a distraction to exploit the public's emotion. Because having low IQ does not imply that he lacked mental capability to know that drug trafficking is wrong. So, the court actually argued that they would have spared him from capital punishment if he was found to be suffering from abnormality of mind, which impairs his mental responsibility. So the fact that the court went on to punish him with capital punishment remains debate. So this case is significant because it highlights how difficult it is to identify a fallacious and non-fallacious activity in the real world. So that's just how it is in real life. And the last real life case is an advertisement for a good cause. So the premises here are logically and morally relevant to the conclusion because we all know that the babies are suffering in Bangladesh due to the lack of healthcare and limited resources. So this argument provides a good reasoning why we should donate the money. So therefore, this type of appeal to duty is considered not fallacious. So now I'll be passing my time to Lucy, who will be telling us more about the argument.
Okay, thanks, teacher. So the next fallacy that we have is the argument fallacy. We'll first look at abusive, which can also be called personal attack. So the definition of this will be, this will actually happen when someone attacks the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument directly. This will be a general structure of the argument. So X will argue A, and X has an objectionable character, therefore A is false. In this example, X said that I think cutting down sugar would be a good method to lose weight, and Y claims, oh, why should I believe your words when you're obese? Now, attacking X's body figure is definitely irrelevant to her claim. Just because X is obese, it does not mean that cutting down sugar is not an effective weight loss method. X might just be making a general claim, or either that it just didn't work on X because she might have some metabolism related issues. In this example, Dr. Fields argues that mutual self-esteem is essential to a good marriage, but he's not very well educated, and he has not attended an Ivy League college as well. So the critic will dismiss his claim by attacking his background, which is not relevant with his claim in this case, because his background should not affect the worthiness of his argument. And to add on, one does not have to be very, very well educated to give worthy feedback about good marriages. We'll move on to a real life example. This occurred in 2016 during the US presidential elections, where Trump called out Fiorina's looks. Now this is definitely ad hominem case because Trump is dismissing Fiorina's ability without insulting an irrelevant comment. Because calling out her looks is definitely not relevant to whether she can become the next president or not. We'll now move on to circumstantial. This occurs when someone attacks a claim by saying that the person is only making it because it's in their interest or because of their circumstances. However, there is no bearing on whether the claim is true or false. So here's the structure. Person X will argue A, and because of person X's circumstances or interest, person X therefore has a motive for arguing A, and we can conclude that A is false. So this will be the first example, a conversation between a salesman and X doesn't want to believe the salesman because of his status as a salesperson. Now this is fallacious because we can tell that yes, the salesman has an interest in selling X the car, but it does not mean that he's lying about the functionality of the car. So what if he is? We are still unable to conclude based on his interest as a salesman, because it's reasonable for us to believe that the salesman is selling the car because he truly believes in its function. This example will be about Peter's argument against the rent control initiative. The author is claiming that we should not take his argument seriously because he's a landlord. Yes, Peter is a landlord, but it does not mean that his argument against rent control initiative is faulty. What if he has a motive in claiming so? We are still again unable to conclude based on his personal interest as a landlord. Therefore, the argument is fallacious. So looking at this real life example, the author thinks that Dalai Lama is only claiming so because he wants to return as a leader. In this case, the author is ignoring the substance of Dalai Lama's claim and discrediting his argument by calling attention to certain circumstances that will affect the Dalai Lama, which which is not relevant in this case because his status does not affect the truthfulness of his argument. Last but not least, U2. This occurs when someone attacks a claim by saying that it must be false because it's not consistent with the arguer's past actions or words. So in other words, the counter-attack will portray the arguer as someone that's hypocritical. So person X argues that A is wrong, and person B asserts that X actually did or said A before. So we can conclude that A is false. Now in this conversation, X says that you should not be eating that. It has been scientifically proven that eating fat burgers are not good for your health. But Y said that, oh, you eat them all the time, so I think your claim will be false. In this case, pointing out the eating habits of X is not relevant to the truthfulness of X's claim. Just because X fails to follow her own advice, it doesn't mean that her argument is not true. One's argument can only show that X does not practice what she preaches, not that what X preaches is not true or not well argued for. This example is a bit long-winded, but in summary, it's a conversation between a professor and a student. And the student is giving a counter-attack by saying that, oh, everyone has actually plagiarized before and the prof included. Now in this case, the student's act of plagiarism is not relevant to whether the professor has plagiarized in the past or not. Just because the professor has plagiarized in the past, it does not mean that plagiarism is not wrong. Therefore, again, the student's argument can only show that the professor does not practice what he preaches, and not that what the professor preaches is not true or well argued for. Since two wrongs don't make a correct, the argument is fallacious. Now I have a real-life example. Kim Kardashian argues that women should not have children out of wedlock, but the author thinks that we shouldn't listen to her argument because she gave birth to a daughter without being married. The fact that Kim Kardashian gave birth to a daughter out of wedlock is definitely not relevant to her opinion on how women should not have children out of wedlock. Kim Kardashian is not acting according to her words. It does not mean that her argument is not worth listening to. However, there are some exceptions. So an argument against a person will not be fallacious when it's clearly relevant to the discussion. This can happen when the topic of argument is directly related, or the conclusion will be a criticism of the person and not a rejection of its claims. This will be the first example. X thinks that climate change is the most important issue and everyone should acknowledge that. However, Y thinks that X did not even go to college, so we shouldn't take X's words into account. In this case, even though Y is dismissing X's claim, it is still relevant because it concerns the truthfulness of her argument. Because climate change is complex, so for her to argue that it's an important issue, it is fair to say that she must be equipped with a certain amount of knowledge to have claimed that. Therefore, the criticism will be relevant. In this example, it concerns Mickey's testimony. The author thinks that we should not believe in Mickey's testimony because of perjury and because he hates Freddie with a passion. In this case, I would think that the conclusion will be the main focus here. So the conclusion is not that we should reject Mickey's argument, but rather we should reject his testimony. In other words, we are claiming that we are not saying that the conclusion is false, but we are just leaning towards believing that his testimony is not true. Because the fact that the witness, which is Mickey, is a known liar and has a motive to lie because of his hatred for Freddie, this itself is relevant to whether we should believe him or not. Last but not least, Jack is a pathological sadist who enjoys torturing animals. Therefore, he should not be in charge of animal shelter. In this case, case, pointing out that Jack is a pathological sadist is relevant to the question if he should be in charge of the animal shelter. Because given that he enjoys torturing animals, is there not a trustworthy candidate that we can trust? And this criticism itself is relevant. Therefore, this argument is non-fallacious. I'll now pass my time to Gavin, who will be explaining more about excellent fallacy.
Essentially, I'll be moving on to excellent fallacy. So firstly, we'll start with the definition. It occurs when someone tries to apply a general rule to an incident when it's clearly an exception. So actually why people want to do this is because people like simplicity even at the cost of rationality as well as the illusion of a perfect law. So this is the structure of this fallacy. So basically we have a general rule to explain it X, and an incident happens, although it's an exception, but it's still being applied into the general rule. So for example, if you can use example, since intentionally causing physical harm to others is a crime, surgeons should not be jailed for cutting up patients. So let's just dissect the argument. It says that the first part of the rule is that intentionally causing physical harm to others is a crime. I believe we can all agree on that. However, there is an exception in this case, which is surgeons, because they need to they need to cause physical harm in order at the start in order to perform the surgery. Otherwise, the surgery would not be able to proceed. Hence, we can argue that this case is an exception and it cannot be applied to the rule, so it's a fallacious. In the second example, it says that it is wrong to lie. John is going out to plan for Jenny's birthday party and therefore he should tell the truth when Jenny asked him where he was going. So similarly, we also have a general rule which is that it is wrong to lie. And in this scenario, John is going out to plan for Jenny's birthday party. And the conclusion from the argument is that therefore John should tell the truth because of the general rule. But we understand from this there is an exception because John has a good intentions as long as his lie does not affect others negatively and in fact affects others positively. So the argument that is being provided is actually fallacious. In the next example, we know that the Bible clearly says that those shall not bear false witness. Therefore, as a Christian, we better answer the door and tell our drunk neighbor with a shotgun that his wife, whom he's looking to kill, is hiding in our basement, or we will be defying God himself. So, again, let's break down the argument. We understand that the rule that the Bible is trying to argue is that those shall not bear false witnesses. And the incident in this case is that the neighbor is already at the door with the shotgun and looking to kill his wife. So, in this, and according to the rule, if there is no exception provided, we should answer the door and tell the truth. However, in this case, it's an we can clearly see that it is an exception, because if we do indeed tell the truth, then it will lead to the death of his wife, and in this case, it will be not morally right as well. Therefore, the argument presented is fallacious. In the next example, we know that people are obligated to keep their promises. So when Jessica is married to Tyler, she promised to stay with him for life. Therefore, she should stay with him now even though he has become an abusive spouse addicted to gambling and drugs. So in this case, the general rule is that people are obligated to keep their promises. And the incident is that Taylor is abusive to his wife as well as addicted to gambling and drugs. However, in this case, we can also tell that it is an exception, not only because Jessica has made the promise to Tyler, which now he has changed already, but also that he has now become abusive, as well as addicted to gambling and drugs, which is a high enough exception from the general law. Hence, it is also fallacious. Moving on to the last example, freedom of speech is a constitutionally guaranteed right. Therefore, John should not be arrested for his speech that incited the riot last week. In this case, the general rule is that freedom of speech is a constitutionally guaranteed right. So even if John's speech incited a riot last week, the argument mentions that John should not be arrested. However, similarly, we understand that this can be an exception because whatever he said has resulted in a very serious consequence, and this serious consequence should already allow him to be arrested and not simply because of one rule, and therefore his action should be spared. And therefore, this is also fallacious. Let me just give you one real life example. I think we all know who this guy actually is, right? During the COVID period, he refused to wear her mask. But so we just backtracked a little bit. So actually, when she first came back to Singapore from Britain in 28 June 2020, she actually had to serve a 14-day stay-home notice at Marina Bay Sands. So because it's a stay-home notice, she's not supposed to loiter around, but we all know she will not behave herself. So what happened was that actually the hotel gave them a one-time entry for a card, and obviously she's not supposed to leave. So actually she left her room without a mask because she wants to view the night scene of the city. So actually she was reminded not to do so, but obviously we all know she not only not wear her mask, but repeatedly she'll keep doing such things that block the rules. And her argument was that she had the right to use the hotel amenities because she had paid $2,004 for a stay. And in this case, so just to break down her argument, right, general rule that she's implied is that we have the right to enjoy the things that we have paid for, which I think we can all generally agree on. However, in this case, in this particular incident, the batch lady had paid $2,400 for her stay, and therefore she claims that she has a right to stay there. However, in this batch lady is an exception to the general rule because she has to serve her 14 days notice, which she supposedly should not leave her room. Not only so, she did not wear her mask, and although it is needed. Because of this current circumstances, where she's not supposed to leave her hotel and need to wear a mask, or rather cannot leave anywhere else, she actually has no right to utilize the hotel amenities to be in line with the law. And therefore, this general rule does not apply in her case, and she does not seem to understand that she's really made a fallacy. So I'm just moving on to the conclusion. What is the thing?
So for the conclusion, this is what we have covered today. Three types of fallacies: appeal to pity, ad hominem, and accident. And here are some key takeaways for each of the fallacy. For appeal to pity, you have to check if the premises are relevant to the conclusion and if the argument contains any exploitation of emotions. And for ad hominem, you have to check the relevance between one's claim and the critic's rebuttal. If it's irrelevant, it will become like a ad hominem fallacy, which has three types: abusive, circumstantial, and meaningful. And if it's relevant, the argument will not be fallacious, as is crucial to this reason. For accident fallacy is to determine if the incident is an exception to the general rule. If the incident is not an exception but deemed as one, the use of accident fallacy is undermined. So now we'll be moving on to a quiz to test your understanding. You all can scan this QR code and take the quiz, and then you all have 5 minutes to complete it, and then we will explain the questions after 5 minutes. So yeah. so 5 minutes are up, and now I'll explain the quiz answers. So for question 1, the question is it a fallacy or not? And the answer is actually not fallacy, because this passage is just a description of what was happening in the car dealership shop, and there's no reasoning in this passage, therefore it cannot be a fallacy. For the next question, which kind of fallacy is this argument? The answer is actually is an accident, because the general rule here is that exceeding the speed limit is illegal, and the specific case that it is applied to are ambulances. The ambulance here is an exception because they are actually allowed to speed while on official duty. Next, which type of fallacy is this? Is actually appeal to duty, since this argument includes Peter's unfortunate circumstances in order to convince the readers that they should offer the new job to Peter. Next, which type of ad hominem fallacy is this? It's actually circumstantial, since the author of this argument states that it is in this actress' interest to say that it is healthy to drink milk since she gets paid for it. But however, this does not have any bearing on whether drinking milk is actually healthy or not. Moving on, which type of fallacy is this? It's actually an accident fallacy again, since the general rule here is that the claim is wrong and the specific case that is applied to is capital punishment. However, it does not apply here, since there are cases where capital punishment is morally defensible, such as in the case of serial killers. This argument actually also involves appeal to authority, as mentioned by the previous group also. The last kind of which type of fallacy question is this. The answer is actually ad hominem due, as the argument portrays the doctor as hypocritical, since the doctor's advice that the patient should not drink coffee is inconsistent with his own actions of drinking coffee regularly. And next, you have to identify which argument is fallacious, A or B. The answer is actually A, since we were not told what Paul's argument against the legal system was. Even if there were flaws in Paul's character, he may still have a good argument that the legal system is indeed corrupt. And B is not fallacious, as the conclusion is supported logically by the fact that he was drunk when he made the claim, and the fact that Paul was drunk is actually logically relevant to the conclusion. Therefore, B is not fallacious, and the answer is B. The last question is you have to identify which argument is fallacious also. And so the answer is B, as Mary's diagnosis should not be a deciding factor when one votes for a class president, especially if Mary's leadership capabilities are better than that of Sarah's. And A is not fallacious, since there was a valid and good reason why John did not complete his homework, which was the fire in his house. And yeah, thank you. That concludes our presentation.
All right, before we move, I think we take a break here, but before that, so we have seen three